How much will my monthly installment change by? Will a reduction in stress test rate affect the amount of home loan that someone is eligible for? So how does this affect home loan rates here in Singapore? Let's dive in. What does the recent decision by the US Federal Reserve to cut interest rates in September mean for home buyers in the Singapore market? The US Federal Reserve initiated interest rates cuts, which is the first time that they've eased it since last December. These adjustments came after the US labour market softened, with Fed Chairman Jerome Powell believing that the recent pace of job creation is below the break-even rate needed to hold the unemployment rate constant. They also signaled 2 more rate cuts by the end of 2025, which will bring interest rates down to about 3.5 to 3.75% in the US by year end. So how does this affect home loan rates here in Singapore? Our housing mortgages are typically pegged to the Singapore Overnight Rate Average, in short, SORA, which closely reflects local market conditions. When the US Fed cuts their interest rates, SORA generally decreases. However, what's different this time is that the SORA rates have already come down since the start of this year, ahead of the US Fed's interest rate cut. At the time of this article, did you know that private resale variable interest rate packages are hovering around 2 to 2.3%, while fixed rate packages are around 1.8 to 2%? Therefore, the US Fed cutting rates now will not lead to a drastic drop in interest rates here in Singapore, as it has already been decreasing since the start of the year. However, interest rates in Singapore will still likely soften, given that the US has and will continue to decrease their interest rates. So we could see in particular a return of variable interest rate packages becoming cheaper than fixed rate packages. So how much will my monthly installment change by? So to give you an indication, let's consider this scenario. A 0.5% cut in interest rates for a loan amount of $2 million will result in roughly $367 per month in savings for a household. This is equivalent to about $4,404 a year. So imagine if you are thinking of selling your home. Will this reduction in monthly interest increase or decrease the urgency for you to sell? And what will then happen to prices in the resale market? Now, beyond monthly installments, lower interest rates also increase housing loan eligibility. Banks use an internal stress test rate to compute the amount of housing loan that a buyer is eligible for. So this stress test rate uses a higher than market interest rate to assess a borrower's housing loan eligibility, so that the banks can have additional security that the homeowner will continue to service their monthly installments should interest rates suddenly spike. So the stress test rate is currently at 4%. With the US Fed having reduced the interest rates, this could give local banks more confidence to lower the stress test rate. So how much will a reduction in stress test rate affect the amount of home loan that someone is eligible for? Here's a comparison of how home loan eligibility can change with a decrease in the stress test rate. If stress test rates go back to 3.5%, which is a 0.5% cut from the current 4% rate, a household earning $20,000 a month will now be able to have $140,000 more just in loan eligibility. If you look at the total purchase price, this means an increase from 3.07 million to 3.26 million if they take the full 75% loan to value ratio. What's important is this effect will occur despite an individual having no change to their monthly income. So with home buyers now being able to afford a larger loan and consequently a larger property purchase price, you have to ask yourself this question: would it be easier or harder for someone to afford a property? And then what will happen to prices if you choose to wait for interest rates to drop even further? In summary, the US Fed interest rate cuts have a tangible impact on Singapore's home loan landscape. Now, while SORA rates have come down ahead of the US Fed's interest rate cuts, the general trend still points towards home loan rates here in Singapore coming down, which also means that home loan eligibility will continue to increase. Take care and see you in the next one.